So in the films, traveling around the country and talking to different people who came to the exhibition and with their childhood memories and wonderful, wonderful stories people brought to us, and you'd ask, well, what was your favorite film? And I would say, overwhelmingly, the favorite film was Heidi. People loved that movie. It had everything going for it. It had all types of personalities, the good guys winning, everybody coming together at the end, wonderful finales. And then, as always, a common theme in most of Shirley's early films during this 4 or 5 year time block was what I call the fantasy scenes. So you not only had the costumes from the little storyline that's going on, but you have her going off into various fantasies, so you can bring in these wonderful imaginative costumes. When we have, first of all, in the Shirley film, we have what I call the basic Heidi costumes. This is a very perfect example of one. And again, we have a little Shirley Temple doll standing next to this costume with an identically made costume made for her in the studio at the time that the actual costume was made for Shirley to be wearing. So a Shirley Temple Heidi costume and the matching Shirley dress. And then over here, another wonderful one from the Heidi scene. This one is from the mountain scene. Many of the costumes that were worn by Shirley in the, what I call the mountain scenes with grandfather, are very interchangeable. They'll have jackets or coats that were worn with various scenes, aprons that could have been worn with various pieces. And this is an example of one with a very interestingly cut vest. All of the pieces had to be made so Shirley could not only, she wasn't just standing there looking pretty, she had to perform. I mean, think of the mountain scenes. You were climbing some pretty high mountains, you were doing some pretty acrobatic, so to speak, type of movements. So they had to be things that would allow a very energetic young girl to be able to act naturally. So that would be a very good example. And this one we brought to show you because if you watch the film, this bonnet is so iconic. This is the bonnet that she wore over and over again when she was on the mountains, when she ran away. Even the little tears are exactly the same as you see them in the film. I thought they were so wonderful. The blue velvet dress, I think, is beautiful. This is the scene when Clara's father comes home for Christmas, when she's now living in Frankfurt with a rich family, which always happens in her films again. And they're very kind to her and very good to her. And it's the Christmas scene when they're all singing Silent Night. And this is the beautiful costume she's wearing, a blue velvet, very, very lovely. I love this red velvet coat with the sable collar, the sable trim, the matching boots with the sable trim on them as well, the high boots, and even the matching hat with the little sable mount on that and the lace trim on the inside. Shirley is in the carriage scene in Frankfurt when she hears her grandfather, who's walked down from the mountains to find her and bring her home, and she's in the carriage and the carriage is driving away, and she hears her grandfather calling, Heidi, Heidi, and she turns around and looks for him. It's a very poignant scene, and fittingly, an absolutely outstanding, outstanding costume. In the, as I said, in the scenes of Shirley's movies, there are always the fantasy scenes, and one of the most famous fantasy scenes that takes place is the fantasy scene with the magic Dutch shoes. And here are the shoes themselves, the famous wooden Dutch shoes that Shirley in the film, in the movie, referred to as my magic dancing shoes. And they would take her and transport her wherever. And this is the actual costume that was worn, the little Dutch girl costume. So in case you're wondering why there's a Dutch girl costume in a Heidi movie, it's because it was one of the fantasy scenes, with the wonderful embroidery on the flowers that is repeated on the apron with the green silk ribbon trim. It's absolutely wonderful. The flower trim is continued onto the sleeves. Just a wonderful, wonderful costume all the way around, including its original wooden shoes. And then, for the grand finale, again, a fantasy scene was the French court scene. And again, seemingly having no relationship with the theme of Heidi, but they wanted to have scenes where they could bring in Shirley's skill and ability at dancing and singing and a different type of performance. So this extraordinary gown, and imagine how this has been saved all these years. This is the finest lace that you can ever see, with the beautiful palettes appliqued onto it to give it a little bit of a glitter, and drape, 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 drape. Wonderful. The pannier, the green silk pannier at the hips, and then at the edging, the entire back of the skirt, on the bottom of the skirt, are these garlands of silk, roses, and flowers that are really quite beautiful. Along with it, the matching shoes that she wore for the performance. A very extraordinary costume. And once again, the costume sketch, Glenn Wakeling, the costume designer for this movie, and here is her original costume sketch for the costume, and you can see how carefully it followed along over the time. One of Shirley Temple's favorite movies was Bright Eyes, done in 1934, one of her earlier movies. And not only was it one of her favorite films that she worked in, but this was one of her favorite costumes. She loved this costume. She felt so good in it. This is known as her Aviator costume, and it appears in numerous times throughout the film, particularly at the beginning when she is hitchhiking to the airport so she can talk to her surrogate father, who serves to give her good advice and whom she dearly loves, played by James Dunn. And it comprises this wonderful red leather aviator jacket with a little emblem on the front, and has the buttons, and we buckle it and take it off, and underneath is this wonderful little jumpsuit, which I love because it has these great big pockets at the side, and it's just a great costume all the way around. What a wonderful costume for a child today, with the red piping, one of her very favorite costumes, the aviator jumpsuit with the leather jacket, and finishing it off with this leather helmet. How extraordinary is this to have this still preserved for us all these years? What a gift to all of us. With the under cap and then the over helmet, and she wrote about this in her autobiography, that what she loved about it was the little propeller-shaped design at the front with the little red stone in the middle, and then repeated with the little star design at the side and at the side. But there was a propeller design that was her particular favorite, and she felt so great. She felt so spiffy when she wore this, a little girl. Another of her very iconic costumes, the dress from singing the song Good Ship Lollipop, which of course wasn't a ship, it was an airplane, but this is where she sings that very, very famous song, The Good Ship Lollipop. Very, very simple red plaid dress, and again, notice how short it is because it had to adhere to her principle. The length of the dress would be as far as her fingers would extend if she was holding them against her legs. Very beautiful little dress, and also wonderfully designed to allow her to move freely, to dance, to sing, and to feel very comfortable and yet look crisp and sharp. That particular film did not have a lot of costumes, one of her earlier ones, but those that exist were absolutely wonderful, and we're very privileged to be able to share them with you. One of Shirley's early films was the wonderful Captain January. Shirley is the sole survivor of a shipwreck off New England, and she comes to live in the lighthouse with Captain January, her surrogate father or grandfather, whom she loves very dearly. She's like the pet child of the whole community. Everyone cares for her. We have several wonderful costumes from that film. In the center is the sailor costume worn during the very, very famous tap dance scene with Buddy Ebsen called the Codfish Dance, where they're dancing on top of the codfish barrel, wooden barrel, and it's just a very iconic one and a wonderful costume. I'm going to just reach over here, and so make sure you can see the emblem on the side. Very, very fine costume, very good. Although young Shirley is quite happy with Captain January and her community of friends and her life and feels she's well educated, there are good doers in town who feel she isn't, and they want her to come to school. She's going to have to take a test to go to school to see if she really knows how to read. And so Captain January and Buddy Ebsen take her to the local dress shop to buy her a pretty little dress to wear to school. And this is the dress in the film, if you've seen it. The dress is on the mannequin at first when they go in the dress shop, and then worn by Shirley throughout the film. Beautiful little simple child's dress, absolutely exquisitely done. Wonderful detail, little delicate fabric with little printed flowers, little sheer organdy yoke, little smocking on it, wonderful detail. And then again, as in all of the Shirley films, we have the dream sequences, the fantasy sequences. And this is not so much I guess it's fantasy, but it brings in the characters that are already in the movie, because in this particular scene, Shirley Temple with Captain January and one of his cronies are singing this absolutely fabulous opera song, Tra-la-la, and she's wearing this gown to do it. Alongside of the gown, you're seeing another costume sketch from the series that was done, presumably by Gwen Wakeling, who was her costume designer for this and other films. And this is the original costume sketch for the gown that later appeared in green satin silk with green brocade pattern silk at the sides, these 3 wonderful pearl button droppings, fabulous lace, just this very, very fine early Alisson woven French lace, very wonderful costume. And see how tiny that is? This was Shirley, and she was wearing it, and she was absolutely beautiful and a superb performance throughout. We're so lucky to have these costumes carefully saved by the family all these years. I know I keep saying that, but I keep wanting to emphasize to people, these are the actual costumes she wore in the film. This is so extraordinary. It's such a great privilege to have them to show you.